So maybe we can dive into the 2025 Thomson Reuters and Georgetown Center on Ethics in the Legal Profession report on the state of the legal market. I will just start by taking the opportunity to note that this is Jim Jones's final report. He sadly passed unexpectedly in December and was such a wonderful leader in the profession and chair of the Pro Bono Institute. And I looked forward to reading this report every year. When I first started teaching the legal profession.
Oh, it was a resource that you relied on.
Oh, yeah. And
Yeah.
you know my co-teacher for that class very well, Marielle Stashevsky, who
Yeah.
will be cringing that I said her name out loud. But she and I co-taught law firm business models, and I was brand new. And she sent me the Georgetown State of the Legal Market report, and we invited Jim Jones to come to our class.
Great.
And I really did not know who he was because I was not from this world. And I remember Marielle introducing him to the students and going over his very impressive background. And he was so humble and understated. And she would say, you guys, this is like a really big deal that Jim Jones is here. And she was so right. And every year he would build the whole presentation from scratch for us, would stay after and answer every student's question, and was just a wonderful writer. So we're very sad at his passing. But it was really interesting to read this report, which, like you said about the World Economic Forum report, is probably not unexpected in its predictions. Its main prediction being that technology will come to define the legal market over the next 5 to 10 years. But what's interesting to me about the report is some of its findings around what 2024 looked like for law firms. Long story short, it looked very, very rosy for law firms across almost every practice area.
Yeah.
Higher billing rates and higher realization rates, which is not always the case, and practices that included transactional practices that we saw the entire 2010s, but also the sort of coexistence of success of counter-cyclical practices like litigation and bankruptcy and labor and employment. And you frequently see those as
One or
a
the
seesaw,
other. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But they're all active and successful at the moment. I think the changing geopolitics mean that they will become even more active on both fronts.
Yeah. Just following how the banks did in Q4 of 2024 and all of the what seems to be like pent up energy around M&A, I think the kinds of things that businesses need law firms to do and people need law firms to do are only, up and to the right. I think that's also going to be true for disputes. I mean, we keep meaning to get to this episode where we're going to talk about the ways in which the barriers to filing lawsuits or filing demands for arbitration are falling away given technology. So I think like the kinds of things people need lawyers for are just going to keep growing. I mean, the animal spirits are back in the market, and we're just like lawyers are going to be off to the races. It's how they do what they do that probably has to change in the meantime. I think it's a rough recipe for any law firm leader or legal organization leader solving for the innovator's dilemma, right? Because the work is just everywhere. And what you've done historically has always worked. And it'll probably work this year. It'll probably work fine in 2025. Maybe 2026. I don't know if it's going to work in 2028 if, legal tech has, grown to a point where new models now work, right?
No, I totally agree. And the innovator's dilemma and being structured around what made you innovative in the first place. To our earlier point, these firms emerged 100 years ago, and the leveraged labor model they created to respond to all of the complexity was their innovation. And then in the intervening decades, the billable hour emerged as the primary way of charging for services. And they're structured as partnerships, which is super rare in a world where your organizations are no longer, a dozen partners who've known one another their entire lives and can have handshake type deals. You have thousands of people, many of whom you'll
around
never
the globe.
meet. Yeah.
Around the globe.
In other countries all around the globe. And you're essentially acting as solo practices under the shared brand of your firm.
Yeah.
But the other challenge that creates is that it's a short-sighted model for how you distribute profits, because everybody looks to the profits per equity partner at the end of the year. And it's a very hard model for leaders to convince their partners that they should take some of the bounty that they've accumulated over the past year and invest it in an unknown future in some ways.
Right.
Because there's so much lateral movement now. And so you do that and you take, I don't even know how much money some of these people make, so I'm not even going to try to guess because it'll make me sad.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot. So if you're going to convince an equity partner to take some of their lot and invest it in the future, I can understand why that equity partner would say, you know what, this is just the same as practicing with this other firm that's not asking me to give up from my distribution to do this. And
especially since they have like sort of limited time. I mean, most law firms, you know, sort of give you an incentive to move out when you're 65 at the latest. That's, you know, it's kind of the way the model works. And so, and you're probably earning at your peak partnership share close to then. So you almost never have the incentives don't always align with like building for the innovators, solving the innovator's dilemma. It's just, it's really complicated, I think.
No, it's like if you had a design challenge to work against solving for the innovator's dilemma, a law firm would be the thing that you would construct.
Yes.
Because and you hear this all the time at any reception after a presentation at a law firm, your most senior partners will say, I'm so happy that I'm not going to be part of this and have to worry. My in-laws, many of whom work in law firms, say this to me all the time because I corner them at family events and talk about this and terrify them.
And they mostly try to run away from you now?
Yes.
Because it's all you talk about?
Totally.
I know the feeling. Yeah. I know the feeling. Yeah.
And so the leadership challenge here is huge. And then you have these mid-sized firms, all of whom are merging. One of the other trends that came up is the reliance so many GCs have on going back to firms that they are used to, but also their increasing need for global footprints in their firms and global expertise. So you have firms that are smaller where they have a cultural advantage to figuring this out, but the economics mean that they're forced to merge with a totally different group.
Right.
And all of those integration challenges that go with it. So that's a challenge. And then the other thing I thought was interesting in the report is how COVID sort of shook up a longstanding budgetary framework that law firms use, much of which was allocated to traveling to see clients, to wining and dining recruits. I know on-campus interviews are no longer in person. They're all over Zoom now, and that was an expense. And during COVID, it started to shift away from those three-dimensional human investments into technology. Yeah. And tech has increasingly outpaced tech investment has increasingly outpaced inflation in law firms. And so the report sort of talks about how that trend will continue, and there'll be this new need for investment in strategic leadership of Gen AI strategies and in upskilling the people at your law firm.
Yep.
So a lot to think about, none of which is really surprising, I think, but all of which is not easy to solve for. Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.